Hi, Bishop Jim Hazelwood here from the New England Synod, but I'm here in my role as part of the team of 9 bishops, one from each region, that put together a new first call process for candidates for ministry, primarily word and sacrament, but also word and service. And this video that you're about to look at is actually 2 videos that I put together. It's with candidates from our various seminaries, and we couldn't arrange the schedules for everybody to be together at the same time, so there's 2 separate videos. The first is a conversation with 3 candidates from different seminaries and different backgrounds, and the second is, I think, with 4 candidates plus an intern pastor and another bishop. I know it's long, but you probably could put it on in the background and just listen to it because you don't need to see people unless you want to see people. I hope it's helpful. I want to mention here very clearly that we are committed to evaluating this as we go along. So this is not like something that's set in stone and in 50 years we'll look at it. No, we're already making some changes and we've gotten some great input as we go. So I hope these videos are helpful. This is the one with candidates. There's also another one with regional candidacy managers and seminary folks and a couple bishops. So take your pick, look at them all, and hopefully it can be a resource, and share it with your colleagues as you wish. Take care. God bless.
So I want to welcome everybody to another one of our Zoom conversations about the new first call process. My name is Jim Hazelwood. I serve as Bishop of the New England Synod and was one of 9 bishops, part of a planning team that put this new first call process together that was approved by the Conference of Bishops. And today I'm with some more of our candidates for rostered ministry in the ELCA, and I'll just start off by letting them introduce themselves. Sergio.
Hi, I'm Sergio Rodriguez. I'm in Houston, Texas, and I'm a capstone student. So I'm about to go through the approval process, hopefully be approved by December.
Lourdes.
Hi, my name is Lourdes Olsen, and I am a member of cohort 1 of Luther Seminary's new MDiv-X program, which is an accelerated Master of Divinity. So at the same time that I am taking my courses, I'm also interning at a local church where I am in Las Vegas, and also doing my clinical pastoral education at the same time.
Thank you. Abby.
My name is Abby Johnson. I am a student with United Lutheran Seminary. I was based on their Philadelphia campus for the last 3 years, and now I'm doing my capstone internship in Arlington, Massachusetts at St. Paul Lutheran Church. And I'm a candidate for Word and Sacrament with the New England Synod, and will hopefully be going through the approval process later this year.
All right, great, thank you. Lourdes, I didn't realize that you were actually in Las Vegas. That makes this an early morning video for you.
Yes, it's a little early, but I'm kind of used to it since my classes are in Central Time.
Got it. Well, great. Well, thank you for doing this. I did this with somebody else, and it was, I think, 9 a.m. for us and 6 a.m. for them. So I thought maybe I should have an Uber Eats deliver them some Starbucks or something, but they managed. So let's just go through everybody and just your, initial reactions, questions that you might have, and we'll each take a turn, and then we'll just have a general conversation. So. Sergio, any thoughts, questions, remarks about this new first call process?
As I was reading through some of these documents about the new first call process, and I actually managed to have a conversation with my home synod bishop before this conversation. I think as someone who's in this capstone position, I'm going to find this process to be a lot more helpful. And a lot more freeing for me, specifically because I'm looking to start a PhD hopefully in a couple of months. So it at least grabs me a lot more flexibility with the process and a lot shorter time so that I may consider at least starting a part-time call as my first-time call while I pursue my further higher education. So yeah, I wanted to just lift up the fact that I think it's a much better process.
And you're a candidate in the Southwest Texas Synod, is that right?
Exactly, Southwestern Texas Synod.
Okay, so yeah, Bishop Sue Briner, she's already moving on this new process. She's already having conversations with people. Oh, great. Yeah, thanks. Lourdes, what about you? Any thoughts, questions?
Because I am part of an accelerated program, I have talked to other pastors that I know about the call process that they went through. And so looking at what has been come up with really also does seem much better than what they had to do. And it fits in better with the accelerated program that I'm in. I did have a question, and maybe we'll get to it later. I don't know if you have anything to say about it now, but there was something on the frequently asked questions document number 8, and I'm still not exactly clear on what this Pentecost group is that is mentioned.
Yes, that's a good question. Let me pull that up. I didn't have that document open. Yes, so the Pentecost group is, it's so funny that this has garnered more attention than anything else. So first of all, what it is, in the assignment process that we used to have, candidates would be assigned to a synod. And so I'll just use New England as an example. And let's say that John was assigned to the New England Synod, and for a variety of reasons, we were not able to have a call for him. Maybe the initial one didn't work out for a variety of reasons. And then typically I would say to other people in my region, other bishops in my region, John's call didn't work out. Do you have anything? And then they also, for whatever reason, they did not have any calls available. So then what we used to do is we would then put their rostered ministry profile in, basically it's like an online monster.com for other bishops all across the ELCA to see. And then I would send an email out to all of the bishops, all 65 bishops, and saying, look, didn't work out for John. So I put his rostered ministry profile in the Pentecost group if you want to go and look at it. So they could go look at it and then download it. In actuality, it was a very underused tool in the old system. I would guess, off the top of my head, I would say maybe 2 times a year, I would see an email from a bishop saying, so-and-so's rostered ministry profile is in the Pentecost group. So it's pretty rare. But the reason we included it in the new system is we wanted to have a tool to make somebody's profile available to all 65 bishops. So that's what it is. And so the question has come up, well, the Pentecost group is available as a tool. I actually think it might get used, but I think it's going to get used even less with this new system because people, so Lourdes, in your case, you would be, you're already a part of a synod, you have a home synod candidacy, so that bishop has responsibility for you until you're called. So there's a little bit more of a personal relationship aspect to this new first call process. So I think the likelihood of you or somebody else ending up in that Pentecost group, which some people have wondered if it's kind of a no man's land or no person's land, and people would get lost. I think in the new system, it'll be less likely that would happen. But I'm glad you asked that because several people have said, what is this Pentecost group? I've never heard of it. So good question. Yeah.
Thank you.
Abby, thoughts, questions?
Yeah, well, my thought in reading through the details of this new process is that I upon first impression, think it's beneficial both to the seminarian but also to synods too, and to kind of do a bit more of that collaborative work. as opposed to kind of like a draft style. And so I think that that struck me as something that I see as being helpful for both the new seminarian with a first call, but also with synods, and making sure that some of their needs or their things are that they voice in that process as well are attended to. And so I in more of like a holistic sense was thought that that was a real positive takeaway from a lot of this. And as a capstone intern, I guess my question slash comment is also in how the timeline aligns with those who are in their like, I guess, traditional track of doing academic work their fourth year, if that's, and if that depends also on different synods, because a capstone internship is kind of in a little bit more of like a flex position in terms of their dates and things kind of are a little different depending on one synod to another. And so a little curious about more details to how that works for someone in my position.
Sure. So let's take your situation as an example, and then let's also then talk about somebody who might be in the, what was the more traditional route where the 2 years of seminary, internship, return to campus, or return to studies for the last year. So in your situation in New England, because we do candidacy approvals twice a year, November and mid-June. And are you up this coming November, or are you up in June for your approval?
I'm up in June. So yeah.
Okay, so then the way it would work in your situation is that several months prior to your approval, so probably sometime next early spring, late winter, you and I would have a conversation either on the phone or by Zoom. And I would just basically get a sense of, what are your hopes? What are your desires? Where do you see yourself? What kind of ministry interests you? And at the same time, I would also articulate, not specific options, say in the New England Synod, if you wanted to stay in the New England Synod, but just kind of more general, what's the state of call processes in New England, things like that. I would also probably take time and lift up other opportunities, not only in other synods in Region 7, but around the church to say, there's opportunities to serve, in places like Montana and South Dakota, and actually some of those synods that have student loan debt relief programs that are making those places more and more attractive to people. Go and serve for, 5 years, and when you leave, you're debt free. That's not bad. But, or maybe there's urban ministries that I learn about in, Texas or something like that might be good. So we would have this just general conversation. And out of that conversation, I would get a sense of what you're hoping for. And then when it came to your approval in June, assuming you're approved, but at approval in June, you would then be available for call. You could start interviewing after that approval in whatever place we work out and decide. Now, I believe your capstone at the congregation you serve goes on for another month or so after that approval. Is that true?
Yes, my internship will be through August.
Okay, so then obviously you'd want to fulfill that responsibility, but certainly over the summer you could be interviewing with possibility for call in September. Okay. So that's the big advantage for somebody like you. You would not have to wait for a formal assignment the first week of October.
Okay.
So let's say it's somebody from another synod that has, I know off the top of my head, like Lower Susquehanna, I think they do monthly candidacy meetings. And so maybe somebody, if it was, say, at the Gettysburg campus of United Lutheran Seminary, and they came up for approval in April, and they were graduating in May, well, same thing. They would have a conversation with Bishop Dunlop, assuming their approval in April, and then at that time, then assuming they graduate, actually get the degree a month later, by the end of May, they could then start interviewing. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of how the process hopefully speeds things up for candidates, and there'll be less lag time in between completion of studies and start of a ministry.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, good questions. Other thoughts or questions about this? Rumors you've heard from your classmates about this. I've loved some of these that I've heard. My favorite one is, oh, now we're stuck in our home synod for all eternity.
I don't know if this is so much of a rumor per se, but one of the like quick narratives that I hear very quickly is before you had no say, and now you can do whatever you want as the candidate, as a seminarian. And I imagine neither of those are entirely accurate, but that's one of those kind of things I've heard voiced in like a quick, elevator
Right.
kind of pitch of the difference between the two. Before you had no say, you went wherever you were told to without any input, and then now you can pick whatever you want to do.
Right. And you're right. Neither are true.
Yeah.
I think rather than focus on the past and what people thought about that system, let's focus on the future. Yeah, I mean, it's not whatever you want. We're a church. When we enter into the rostered ministry process, we're saying, I'm available for call. And we're also saying, that means I'm open to the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit may say, I know you thought you were going to go into an associate youth ministry position as a youth pastor in a large suburban congregation, but the Holy Spirit might have said, no, we've got this congregation that's really struggling, but it's, in Camden, New Jersey, or it's, in the south side of San Francisco, and that's where the Holy Spirit has decided to call you. So it's not whatever we want. I think we always need to be attentive to that. And that is one of the sacrifices that we make when we go and we respond to God's call. We're making the sacrifice from it's what we want to it's what God wants. And, as somebody that's been in ministry for 30 plus years, that is always challenging because I would much prefer to do things the way I want rather than the way God wants. But that's kind of my whole Jonah experience more than anything else. I will say, though, that this does give some more agency to candidates. I think the fact that there is a conversation with your home synod bishop prior to approval, that alone changes the dynamic, because in the past, that was actually strongly discouraged, that there be conversations in advance. So I think you're right. It does give candidates more agency, which I think what you're hearing in these comments is their appreciation for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Question.
Yes.
I identify as a gay man, so many of my conversations with LGBTQIA colleagues has been that the previous process really wasn't helpful. And actually, many folks that I've been in conversation with they'd have to wait 3, 4, 5 years before they would get their first call. And then I've had other conversations with folks where they're not really comfortable with their home bishop and their home synod. So I think my curiosity with this new system is, in what ways do you see this functioning for the benefit of LGBTQIA candidates? And where do you think perhaps maybe something could be retooled a little later with that in mind? So that's kind of where I'm at, because I have a lot of other friends they're either finishing their internship or they're going to start their internship, and this is just a new way it's a completely different system, and so they're concerned about how this is going to work for them.
And I think those are valuable questions that they're asking. As a bishop that is in a synod that has a long history of being very open and welcoming to LGBTQ candidates, I'm always, there's a part of me that shouldn't be, but I am a little surprised, because the New England Synod has benefited over now decades of candidates coming to us, and we continue to have a very robust and some of our best pastors. And so for me to hear this continues across the church is really both frustrating and saddens me. I think that there are parts of our country, as we're recording this, just short of a very controversial presidential election, there are parts of our country that are less welcoming. I mean, that's just true geographically, demographically. Having said that, also, I don't want to give the impression that New England is just, you know, all welcoming, because we have had challenges in some congregations. So I'm hopeful that because this new process will give people more agency and input in the conversation earlier on than in the past, those questions can be addressed, which leads to the second part of your question, which is candidates that are in synods where their relationship with their home synod bishop is less than ideal. The other piece here is that because this process moves from essentially a national assignment process to more of a synod and regional process, what I would hope is that my colleagues in their own regions could be more open to say, look, I have a candidate through my process, and you know, it's at a little bit of an awkward relationship. They're coming through the process, and I've had my conversation with them. They're interested in staying in our region, but they're not interested in staying in our synod for whatever reason that may be. So that then, as you're talking, as a bishop is talking with other bishops in his or her own region, you know, it might be a next door region. So say instead of Southwest Texas, it might be in the Gulf Coast. So I would be hopeful that that happens. One of the questions, and somebody else raised this, and this is part of why we need to be evaluating this as we go along, is could there be a way for, and I don't know what to call it, but some kind of appeals process comes to mind. That's not the right word, where it's not working in a particular synod and somebody feels, a candidate feels stuck. How could they, what resources or what options would they have? We don't have that in this, and that's been raised a couple of times in these conversations, and I do think that is something that we need to look at. So these, you know, really good questions that we need to be mindful of. Other thoughts, other questions? Did I answer that one well enough, Sergio? As best I could, you know, I mean, I can't give guarantees for the future, obviously.
No, I mean, I bring it up because I have a friend who graduated last year, and it's almost 10 months, close to a year at least for them, and they haven't gotten anything back. And it's, at least in part, their relationship with their home synod is not very helpful, because again, majority of the congregations in their home synod, it's just not queer friendly. So it sounds like this is a lot more of a freeing process. So I'm hoping that this can at least work for the benefit of folks who have historically had to have waited several years to even be considered for an interview or for a call.
Yeah, and you know, the challenge is in our congregations open. Our congregations open to people of color. You know, we're saying we want to be a younger church. We want to be a more open church. We want to be a more diverse church. And yet, when it comes to call processes, are the congregations themselves actually open? I know there's being progress made in some parts of this church where they were less open. But unfortunately for your friend, that progress isn't coming quick enough. Would your friend like to come to New England?
I'd have to ask them.
And I shouldn't lift up New England as the only one, because there are other synods that are equally as open. Any other thoughts or questions?
I have a question. I, as an MDiv student for Word and Sacrament, was reading this. I recognize through my lens of what I'm studying and where I'm headed. But I wonder how, if this process is at all different for those who are, I know ULS has different programs like the MAPLE program, which is Masters of Arts in Public Leadership, and students who are going through the candidacy process could, you know, take these different degrees that aren't necessarily specific to word and sacrament, or even kind of a position within a church. And so I'm curious, because I read this for my experience, if this process is at all different for seminarians who are going through different academic programs, or hoping for kind of a different position or role at the end than I would be looking at, if this process still applies to them, or if it is at all different for those seeking kind of positions outside of your typical kind of first call congregation setting.
Mm-hmm. So this is for team candidates and MDiv students in terms of word and sacrament. It also is for people in word and service, although there's still, and I know folks in word and service ministry aren't going to like me saying this, but it's true, there's still, word and service is a little bit more, you're on your own, rather than the old process where word and sacrament folks were assigned. And I know they don't like that, but that's the nature of how it is right now. This would not apply to lay people, people that are not going through a rostered ministry. This is primarily a candidacy process. One of the things that has come up is a question around how will this impact people's first call, which typically in the ELCA has been to a congregation. Could you be called to a ministry as a prison chaplain or a hospital chaplain without having to serve? And, that's going to be kind of one of those things that we're going to, as we go along, we're going to have to see how this goes. Those calls currently require approval by the whole Conference of Bishops. We've seen more of that in recent years, people going directly into hospital chaplaincy or things of that nature. I think that's going to be a curious finding that we're going to, discover as we go along. But yeah, this is primarily oriented towards people in the MDiv, Word and Sacrament track, candidacy process. Good. Anything else from anybody? All right. Well, good. Thank you for doing this. I think your colleagues and other people will benefit from it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop.
Thank you.
In that thing, you can say, Bishop, would you please edit that? Like this whole beginning part, I will edit that out. So, all right. So I've got gallery view. So I'm going to start in gallery view recording this. So I want to welcome everybody. Thank you for being a part of this. We are expecting one other person to join us. So if all of a sudden Robin pops up on the screen, that's why. She might be a part of this. Something might have come up too, because I know she's had a couple things going on in her life. But welcome to this Zoom video, which is designed to help people understand the new first call process that is unfolding in the ELCA. After we do introductions, I'll say a little bit about the new process, what it is, what it isn't, and then we'll have a conversation. And hopefully this will be helpful to people. If you're watching this and you haven't found the actual document that describes it, look right below. I'll put it in a link underneath this video. So let's start with a word of prayer. Good and gracious God, you call many people to word and sacrament and word and service ministries across the ELCA. And as we endeavor to be the church in this time, in this place of North America, we are mindful that it is ultimately your calling that sets us forth to proclaim the gospel in both word and deed. Guide our conversation tonight, and for all those who are watching and listening in the future, that this may help them to grasp a new way of first call assignment. In the name of Christ our Lord, we pray. Amen. So my name is Jim Hazelwood. I serve as the Bishop of the New England Synod and was part of a group of 9 bishops that worked on developing a new, what we are now calling a first call process. I made a mistake already in the prayer. I used the word assignment. I'm not supposed to do that. So there is no longer assignment. It is rather a first call process. And we'll get into describing that after we introduce ourselves. So Sam, if you would go ahead and start.
Sure. I'm Sam. I'm a candidate in the New England Synod, but just moved to Denver, Colorado for a CPE residency. And yeah, I think that's it.
All right. Mark.
Thank you, Bishop Jim, and thank you, Bishop Sue, for your part in putting this together. And thank you very much for the invitation, the privilege of being here. And as we were talking about earlier, I'm glad to have this happen in this conversation. I have been an internship supervisor, mostly with Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary, but also with 3 other seminaries for, this is the 12th intern pastor that this year that I've had the privilege and pleasure of mentoring. Our congregation, though, has had it for almost 4 decades. And so it's really remarkable to be part of such a community like that. And where I live in Sierra Vista, Arizona, 75 miles southeast of Tucson, 3 hours south of Phoenix, and near the border, of course. He, him, her, his are my pronouns I prefer. So I'm glad to be here and be part of this. And it's something that I've been advocating for a number of years.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Justin.
My name's Justin Kierzek, and I'm a candidate with the Greater Milwaukee Synod. I'm actually a part of Luther Seminary's Accelerated MDivX program. So I have a few questions that I'm excited to get a chance to ask.
And Sue.
Great. My name is Bishop Sue Briner, and I serve in the Southwestern Texas Synod. I live in New Braunfels, which is between Austin and San Antonio, and I'm part of Region 4 that consists of 3 Texas Synods, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Central State Synod. So I've had fun working on this project with Bishop Jim.
All right, great. So yeah, so the ELCA has had for its 30 plus years an assignment process that many of us believe served the church well at the point when it all started. But as with many things, times change, church change, needs change. We realized it was time to change that assignment process. So we did that in just at our Conference of Bishops about a week or so ago. It's now called a first call process. And basically what this does is it moves what used to be called the assignment process from a national process event that happened only twice a year in late September and early March to a regional / synod process that can happen virtually at any point throughout the year. And there is a lot of flexibility for every region and every synod to set up their timing, how that works. What I think this does is, first of all, number one, I think it makes for a much more efficient process of getting candidates into calls quicker. So that's the big change that's big impact is a level of efficiency. The second thing is that I think it also will pay attention or give greater agency to candidates that have experienced the prior assignment process as less favorable to what they were hoping. Now, we're also balancing that with the needs of the church. And the needs of the church and the mission of the church are wide and varied. And there is geographical needs from the upper Michigan Peninsula down to where Bishop Sue Briner is serving down in Texas, and then across the country from one coast to the other, and urban and suburban and rural and so forth and so on. So we're trying to kind of hold those two things in tension. And the last thing I'll say is I think it acknowledges also just the reality of the changing nature of the church and the world that we're in. we just recently had our last assignment process. And by the time we actually got to the table, close to 2/3 or more of the people had already been placed somewhere. And so, as one bishop said when we were looking at this process, when the exception, which is a long time ago, they made exceptions for restrictions in assignment. When the exception becomes the norm, then you know you need to look at the new process. So essentially, it takes it from a national to a regional and synodical process. And so that's just a real broad overview. People can read the document. But I thought it would be really helpful to go around and just start again with Sam first, then Mark, then Justin, and Sue and I will respond and engage, and then we'll have an open conversation and see what we go. And I will say one other thing is, I fully expect there will be hiccups with this new system. There is no illusion that we're like rolling this out and we've figured out everything. We did spend 6 months. We did talk with the candidacy and leadership managers. We had engagements through the church-wide offices who also talked with seminary folks, and a lot of bishops had input. So we did the best we could, but I fully expect that probably by next week, we're gonna have, now we didn't think about that, and that's okay. That is part of the spirit of this whole new system, is that it embraces that rather than says, okay, we got it fixed. So there is no like, oh, we're going to evaluate this in 3 years. No, we are evaluating this as soon as this video goes out and somebody sends an email and says, well, what about? And it's like, well, we didn't think about that. Thank you for being helpful. So I wanted to preface our conversation with that as well. So Sam, I'm going to have you be our leadoff hitter for tonight. And I really wanted you to be a part of this because yours is kind of a unique situation. So kind of go ahead and start us off with a conversation.
Yeah, I should say I went to Harvard Divinity, so I didn't go to a ELCA seminary, so that's part of that. I also affiliated with ULS, but even that sort of wasn't normal. I didn't go there for a year, and then I did a capstone internship last year in Arlington, Massachusetts. And so sort of every step of the way was not very normal for me. I also started out in Central State Synod and transferred to New England. So nothing about what I did was normal, which I appreciate New England working with me throughout. But even up until now, I chose to do a CPE residency this year for a lot of reasons, which brought me to the Rocky Mountain Synod. And my wife has a great job here that she would like to keep in Denver, and so have, again, sort of changed that process of not going into assignment. And so I was looking at this particularly through, of course, my own experience and the very abnormal route I took through candidacy, and found it to be a lot easier to work with in my own position, and what I would imagine many other candidates at non-ELCA seminaries would feel as well. I think I had two, comments that stood out to me about the process as a whole. And just two things I think I've been thinking about a lot lately, which is, again, had an effect on my own experience. But first is just the financial burden of the process on the candidate itself, and how that's sort of being addressed through this new process. I think that's a concern I have, and that the candidacy process tends to be very expensive. And the waiting period between whether it be doing a capstone internship or graduating or whatever it might be is a really difficult time for a lot of candidates. Something I experienced, and another reason I chose to do a residency is very practically, financial security is much needed, especially when you have student loans. So that was something that jumped out to me that I'm not sure I saw addressed, right away. I'm sure that that was also in your minds as you were formulating this as well, but that's something I was thinking about. And then sort of my other question, something that stood out to me was, particularly on page 4, there's a paragraph that says, those who do not receive a call within 3 years of their approval must be reapproved by their home synod candidacy committee as per the candidacy manual. And also, I guess the sentence before, candidates must have their approval decision renewed annually by their candidacy committee. I guess one question was, I'm curious what that even looks like. What does that process look like? Does it look like me having another Zoom call with the whole committee? Is it me staying in touch with my relator? What does that actually look like? And then my I think biggest concern with that piece was in particular that candidates of color and LGBTQ plus candidates on average wait 2 to 3 years longer for a call than other candidates. And I'm concerned that that time frame is just further perpetuating sort of that waiting and that anxiety that comes along for many candidates. Being a queer candidate myself, that gives me a lot of anxiety and a little bit of a deadline of, well, if I don't find a call in 3 years because XYZ, or because I took a year to do a CPE residency, like now I feel like the clock is ticking a little bit on me. And now suddenly I have 2 years to figure it out. And then what? I don't know what that looks like. And I think that's something that the sort of candidacy process has always kind of been stacked against a lot of marginalized groups of people. And I'm worried that this will be the same case. And so I'm wondering how that can sort of be something that we're aware of throughout the process. But in particular, that time frame made me nervous when I was looking at it right away.
Sure. I'll take one question, and Bishop Sue, if you want to take another one. So I'm going to address. I lost your first question because you asked 3, so I got the last 2. But the candidacy question on page 4. So actually, what we're doing is basically citing something that is already in existence in the candidacy manual. Mm-hmm. Every synod, I can tell you how New England handles this. But every synod will handle this differently. But I think that I think what we do in New England is pretty common. First of all, the reason why that's there, that every year the candidacy committee needs to vote to reauthorize, if you will, your approval. In New England, that's you don't need to do anything. That's not a Zoom meeting with the candidacy committee. That there's usually an email asking, hey, what's up? And then you would describe your situation, which in your situation you would say, which we already knew, you're doing a CPE residency. And then simply comes up for a vote at the candidacy committee. It's very formal or informal, and just boom, done. Very easy. The 3-year thing, I don't know the history of that. My guess is there's an intentionality around, okay, it's one thing if it's a year, it's another thing if it's 3 years. What's the backstory of a candidate? And I think in those situations, certainly in New England, we've brought people back nowadays we would do a Zoom meeting with them. How has it gone? Tell us about the call processes you have been in. Have you interviewed? And then I think that relating to your last question is LGBTQ community, people of color. I think one of the things we would learn, my guess, is, okay, well, I interviewed in 3 places, but basically they didn't want a Black queer candidate. And so then that's on the call process, the candidate or the congregations. Well, that's an important information for us to know in New England for candidates, say, that might be in another synod someplace else. So then we might revisit it and say, okay, well, maybe we need to get active and have you look in other places, in other locations. And I think that's where this new process will actually lend itself to a lot more flexibility in that. But so I'm not talking all the time. Sue, you want to chime in on these 2, and then maybe Sam can remind us of her first question.
Sure, thank you. So I would say that my guess is that the 3 years tracks with being on leave from call for a maximum of 3 years as well, without an exception from the Conference of Bishops. And so my guess would be that the candidacy committee could in fact grant exceptions by having you go through the reapproval process. But it is to get, if you get so far away from your studies without serving in parish ministry, there's a concern that you've kind of lost your mojo. I will say that I think that this first call process, by having your home synod bishop specifically tending to you until you get a call puts much more onus on your home synod to care for you, and especially because we know you better than any other synod in which you might have been assigned. So I hope that this process will help with that. We have lifted up as the conference that LGBTQIA and persons of color, other marginalized people do have the hardest times finding calls, and we've got to work together. And we do that already, really. I can't speak for you, Bishop Jim, but I know in our region, we are constantly working with each other, particularly for candidates who are hard to place, not because of their giftedness, but simply because of their gender identification or the color of their skin. I want to go back to when you kept saying abnormal, because one of the things that we have learned over the years is that there is no abnormal anymore. Everybody is kind of a one-off in terms of the way in which they do candidacy. So if we could do anything, I'd love to get rid of that word so that you all don't feel like you're not doing something right? Like the world has changed. It's no longer a bunch of white guys that were single coming through seminary, right out of college, right? And God is calling people at all walks of life and all times of their lives. And so for me, I would try to rid the word from your vocabulary, and we'll try to do that as well. What you have is you're part of the ever evolving process of which there really is nothing much normal anymore. The other thing, which was your first question, I believe, had to do with waiting and financial burdens, particularly with the capstone internship. While we didn't talk directly about financial burdens when we were preparing this, what we did talk about was candidates sitting and waiting on the sidelines for the assignment process to come around. And we know that that has financial implications. You got to find another job for a year, or you've got to figure out, where am I going to live if I'm no longer in the parsonage on my internship or whatever. And so I hope that this will help with the financial burdens from the perspective of getting you into calls quicker. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Great.
I think I see traces of sort of your answers in the document itself, but it's helpful to hear from you as well.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that capstone will kind of, I'm going to move over to Mark, but the questions that you raised, I'm really glad that you raised, and that was one of the reasons that I was hoping we'd have one other person who couldn't make it tonight to be a part of it, but you're asking those questions on their behalf as well, so that's great that you're advocating that way. Pastor Mark Perry supervised 12 interns, so you were cheering when you heard the news of this. What are your comments and questions to start us off?
Yes, I definitely was and am, and I'm very pleased about this movement, and especially with so many churches not finding pastors, and the need to remove any obstacles to more and more folks entering into the ministry. And this was definitely an obstacle, as Sam and Jim, you've all mentioned, and for me, most personally, aching with the intern pastors who had to figure something out until their assignment process, that happened in the late fall, really, as that would go into. And so, for example, our previous intern, Paul Benz, like you, Sam, but for a different reason, is in chaplaincy residency in Seattle because of that, having a family to support and so forth. So I'm very grateful for that reason, that it doesn't, that burden is not as much there, at least potentially. So that the question that I have is, reading this and talking with Bishop Jim via email and so forth, just confirming my understanding that now with this process in the model that I'm most familiar with the capstone internship, that the seminarian basically what would be kind of added, if there is anything added, to their responsibilities in terms of moving into the future past internship, is that they do the usual and normal seminary approval process and candidacy approval process. And that then, though, this addition with this first call process is that the bishop of their home synod could even be talking to them before they're approved about possibilities for a first call. And then once they're approved, then the only thing that they have to do is to work with their home bishop synod, their home synod bishop, to be able to identify potential first call opportunities. And then they can indeed start the interview process even towards the end of their internship, sometime after April, which is what I understand is usually when the approval would happen for the seminary and the candidacy committee. And so part of the question is that the seminarian's responsibility then to contact their home bishop prior to approval to initiate that process, or do they work with a candidacy committee to do that, or what is the general thought on that? And also, just to let you know, for some reason my Zoom doesn't let me see everything that you all are seeing. Something happened that flashed up and now I can't get it back. So I see 4 of you, but I don't see myself. So not that I need to see myself, but anyway, go ahead.
Well, we see you and you look lovely. So Sue, you were going to chime in there on that.
Yeah, so thank you. I think that that's a really good question about whose responsibility it is. I know that my assumption is it's the bishop's responsibility to be able to reach out to you. And let me just tell you that I've started that with 2 of our candidates already. So we have 2 candidates that are up for approval in December, and we've set our first regional consultation in November, even though, of course, the new process doesn't take effect to the end of January, but we've got to start doing it now, right? And so because we're going to have a regional consultation in November, I went to the candidacy chair and said, who do we have that is coming up for approval? And then I contacted each of those 2 candidates and said, I'd like to sit down and talk with you. So I have an appointment with one of them tomorrow, and I have an appointment with the other one in a week. And so we'll have an opportunity to sit down and talk about what are their hopes and dreams for the future. Where do they feel God is calling them? And it might be to my synod, but it also might be more broadly to the region or even to the whole church. And so depending on what they say to me, that will initiate me then going potentially, say someone wants to serve in New England Synod, or they're open to anywhere in the US, then I have the opportunity now to be able to sort of make phone calls to my candidacy and leadership manager who will talk to their counterparts to be able to make connections early on so that the process can flow more seamlessly. Does that help?
Yes, thank you. And I guess maybe it's further down the road, but some type of exemplary timeline for all this put together with the seminary approval, the candidacy approval, and what you're talking about now to put out to seminarians and people like me could also be very helpful, so we can understand what's happening, especially as we move into this the first year.
Right. And I think you've just lifted up both one of the advantages and one of the challenges of this new system, because one of the things we did early on was we did a poll of all 65 bishops to say, so when do you normally have approvals? And what we learned is literally 12 months a year. I mean, some people, we do it in November and June. Other people are monthly. I mean, it's all over the place. So the challenge here is going to be the seminaries pretty much are staying with their system of faculty approvals, which happens right about now. Usually it's an October-ish kind of meeting, and they're going to stick with that. So that'll continue. The question then will be, well, when do those particular candidates come up for approval in their synod? So it might be in New England, it might be this November, or it might be in June. So there's going to be some variation in that. But I think asking that question is going to be one of the challenges to figure it out. I think we can come up with an order of how things happen, but that timeline is going to vary. just because you, Mark, will have, I think your current intern is from the Pacifica Synod, but probably other years you might have somebody from another synod, and so they're going to have different timelines. So that'll have to be built into like maybe the beginning of an internship process of like, okay, when is approval? We're going to have to keep that in mind.
Well, in this first year, we're going to be figuring it out as we go. And so in our region, we had a bishop that got on it as soon as the COB meeting was over and said, okay, let's look at when everybody's approval processes are. And so that means we're going to have November, and we're going to do them quarterly. We're going to do these regional consultations quarterly. And so then we've got to back up each of our synods to make sure that we've got it covered in our candidacy processes, as well as when the bishop talks to the candidates.
Right. So that's Region 4, and they might handle it that way. And Region 7, we just have too much fun when we get together, so we forget to plan. We'll work that out. All right, let's move on to Justin.
Yeah, so I think just based on a question that Mark asked, I have two questions. The first is, given this new process, what do you think is the greatest barrier that a candidate would face in this process? And then, just based on the discussion that just happened, context matters, and moving the process to a more regional or localized model, it really does address that concern. However, in moving away from a more centralized model, do you think that there's anything lost in terms of oversight? I mean, I guess what I'm asking is there a chance that a candidate could fall through the cracks?
I think the context question is a good one. And the barrier one is an interesting one to think about. I'll have to think about that one for a second. I think that there is actually less of a chance, and I'll add a qualifier at the end. I think there's less of a chance of a candidate falling through the cracks with this system. Because, as Bishop Briner pointed out earlier, your home synod, where your candidacy is, your bishop is responsible for you until you receive and accept a call. So to just use Sam as an example, she's out in Colorado. She and I have already talked. I've already had a conversation with Bishop Jim Gonya, and so we're moving that along. But until she gets a call, I'm still expected. She talks to me. I mean, she has my email address. She has my cell phone. If something's not going right whenever she's wrapping up her year of CP residency, I'm the one she calls. And so that I can then help make connections. So I think there's less of a chance. One of the things we said early on is this is going to work or not based on how bishops respond to it. That the responsibility and the accountability for the success of this new system falls squarely on bishops. And so I think I'm hopeful that, and I think it will help prevent people from falling through the cracks because there'll be more awareness. Barriers, an interesting question. What kind of barriers might this be? I'm sure there are some that we are blind to. I just think it's just such a perfect system. I can't think of any right now. But if others have one, I'm definitely willing to learn. Yeah, Mark, you had your hand up.
Well, and I don't know if this is possible or realistic or not, could a potential barrier be if the seminarian or whoever's first called does not have the most positive relationship with their bishop?
Yep, that could be a challenge. Yeah, absolutely. So it does center that, makes that relationship more important. The other thing, as you were talking about, that I do think, and this is a concern expressed by bishops that serve synods that are farther away from the center of a lot of activity. So bishops that serve synods where there's lots of rural congregations. I think one of the concerns about this that we're going to need to watch is, are they receiving fewer candidates? That's their concern. It's a legitimate concern because the church has needs there as well. So I do think that that's that's something that we're going to have to watch as we go through this. But good questions, Justin. Sue? Yeah.
Well, just to follow up on that, I think from an oversight point of view, you know, we could have blown up the process completely and just left everything to the Synod bishops. Part of the reason that we decided to go with the regional consultation was to build in a layer of accountability. And also, well, accountability and both from the perspective of making sure that, you know, each bishop wasn't just keeping all the best ones, but also accountability to try and talk the problem that you're talking about, or the potential problem of falling through the cracks. That when we come together with a regional consultation, that we get to talk about all the candidates, whether they're staying in our synod or not. And that really is to try and help prevent candidates from falling through the cracks.
Yeah, it's easier for bishops to hold one another accountable in their regions than it's a smaller group of people. In Region 7, it's 7 bishops. With the exception of Region 5, it's about that size. That's easier for us to kind of be accountable to than to try to hold a group of 65 accountable all across the country. So it does force that to happen. Good questions. Did we get to what you wanted to start with, Justin? Did that? Okay. All right. Good. Sue, you want to chime in with your thoughts or anything in addition before we just kind of have an open general conversation for the last 15 minutes or so?
Yeah, just that I'm really looking forward to talking to these candidates this week and next. Like, I would have enjoyed talking to them anyways, but I'm glad that it's baked into the process now, because I think that's so helpful. Not all bishops know their candidates as they're going through the process, but to make sure that we have touch points of connection can be really helpful. And so I'm looking forward to that, my conversations this week and next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a major shift in the Conference of Bishops, because that had been verboten prior to this. That was explicitly not only not encouraged, it was not allowed. There's some interesting history as to where that comes from. But now we've changed that, and we've said that, yes, bishops should initiate that conversation. To be clear, though, bishops are not to say, so if I'm talking with you, Justin, I am not to say to you before you're approved, well, as soon as you're approved, St. Paul's by the gas station in East Potomac, Connecticut is an ideal place for you. And I can have an interview for you the afternoon of your approval, which is coming up soon. That is not what those conversations are supposed to be about. Those conversations are supposed to be about, you know, Justin, what are your needs? Do you have a spouse that has, you know, particular location needs? What are your hopes? What are your desires? And then I, as bishop, am also, you know, part of those conversations supposed to say, well, look, you know, there's other places. I mean, yes, in New England, we do have, you know, some things we can talk specifically after you're approved. Let's not assume that you're going to be approved yet. But also, you know, I happen to know that in Texas, you know, there's opportunities that you might be interested in too. So that's kind of the nature of those conversations. Other thoughts, questions that people have? Mark. You're still muted.
All right, does that sound better?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Wondering if this also brings more of the reality that I remember starting with Jim back in PLTS, that it helps to go to the synod, or excuse me, the seminary that's in the area that you're most wanting or liking to be, you know, receive a call because of the networking possibilities. So that's your home synod. Is that any factor in that? To make it more of a factor?
As you're applying to seminary, choose.
Yeah.
If I want to be in the West, choose a Western seminary.
That kind of thing. Does it make it more likely that way to be?
That'll be an interesting thing to measure. One of the things we do know that is roughly a 2/3, 70% of all candidates do end up very close to their home, their synod of candidacy, their home synod as we call. So that's already been true. We've had more people and I don't know if it's because I'm a PLTS grad, or I think there's a number of other factors, but we've had a few people go out to PLTS from New England for a number of different reasons. We've had some recent increase. Most of New England have been Philadelphia or Gettysburg, now called United Lutheran Seminary. So I don't know that it would factor in too much, but I do think, I mean, I think one of the interesting things that you raise is as a candidate comes through the process, certainly I'm, going to be with my ear, is somebody saying, I'm really hoping to be in such and such a setting, and listen as that evolves over time. We've had we've had 2 candidates out of New England either go to or are going to go to the Nebraska Synod. And that largely has grown out of family connections and internship experiences. So that's a shout out for Nebraska opportunities there.
Brian Moss, Bishop Moss would appreciate that.
Right. The other thing to think about too is there are some synods that do extensive programs in student loan relief. I think there's some motivation there to go do some hunting in that area to say, I'll go serve my first call and serve 5 to 7 years and get my student loans taken care of. I mean, that's something to pay attention to if you're thinking about a 35-year ministry career.
Well, and I think connected to that, that'll be part of our job is to learn more about those kinds of things, because part of what we want to consult with candidates about as well is, for instance, I don't have this problem in Texas, but I'm thinking about in Minneapolis area or whatever, where everybody says, I'd like to stay in Minneapolis. And then the bishop has to have a conversation to say, do you know how long you might wait for a call in Minneapolis? Because I got a long line of people out the door. But Northwest Washington Synod, for instance, perhaps they have loan forgiveness, or I know they're looking for candidates or whatever, then we can maybe give you some advice about other opportunities you might want to consider in general terms.
This is the awkward silence moment when we're all in the room. Somebody would say, "Oh, let's get a cup of coffee."
I guess I would ask you all what excites you most about this process, and what gives you the greatest pause?
Good question. Sam, you have your mic open.
Oh no. I forgot to mute myself. I'll go anyways.
Okay.
I think to start, the thing that gives me the most pause probably is just I think Justin mentioned just the reliance of this system on, particularly, I guess, as a candidate's relationship with their own committee and their own bishop, and what happens when either there's a fracture there, or there's a lack of trust there for whatever reason. I'm wondering what happens in that case, or who would I go to talk to? Is there a grievance procedure, or is there some centralized body that can help me walk through that? So I think that's the thing that makes me the most nervous is, if I knew that there was so much reliance on my relationship with Bishop Hazelwood, would I maybe hold my opinion back more, or would I speak less, or would that relationship look different? So I think that's probably the thing that makes me the most nervous about it. And I think also the thing that excites me more is it seems to just be a lot more flexible for like you said, what the church is looking like. And I think a question that came up in that flexibility for me was, as the church is changing, does this also open up more room for non-sort of traditional congregational calls as well? Does this, as somebody interested in prison chaplaincy, does this make that look more feasible than having to or needing to go into a congregational first before that takes place? So yeah, I think both excitement and also questions too.
Yeah, 2 things. I think thinking through that piece, Sue, that's something for us to think about going forward. What can we build into this for those where either it's an adversarial relationship, or you could just simply have a transition in bishops. Bishop comes to the end of his or her term, and a new bishop is, and then the new bishop doesn't know you. So it could be, a less suspicious kind of thing. I think the other thing you point to, that's going to be a really interesting unintended consequence. I would not be surprised if we start to see that. It's already started to open up a little bit, a very little bit, but that's fascinating. I had not thought about that, but that could be an unintended consequence of this, is that people end up in more varied first calls, or shared or something like that. That's really insightful.
We'll have to watch it. I mean, sorry, Sam, go ahead.
Not consequence. I think opportunity, right? It's not a bad thing that we're not ending up in
Right.
congregations that
Yes.
either can't afford us or don't necessarily want us to.
Yep.
Right.
Thank you. Good point. Yep.
I will say, I think the number of exceptions to the 3-year rule seems to be growing a bit. At least I noticed that at the last Conference of Bishops. So it's a curious thing. I don't know if the first call process per se will impact that. It just may be another measure of the fact that the world and the church are changing, and we're going to have to keep up.
Yeah. I would like to I'll just chime in. I have concerns when those first calls are to administrative work, when people are really called to word and sacrament, which I think you can define pretty broadly, but that's just my own personal view. I think, though, there's an opportunity here to go back and use your word, Sam, is in, like, you could be called part-time to a congregation and also serve as a prison chaplain, as an example, that those kinds of opportunities could be, could come forward.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Justin, you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, I really like that this has moved from a centralized process to a more local and regional process, because I think it does provide that adaptability, that flexibility, that contextualization of it. I think that's really important. The one thing I have questions about is. I don't think anyone can answer it, is with all the uncertainty around the pandemic and the potential long-term financial consequences to synods and churches, is this process, even in the face of that, going to be flexible enough to deal with that problem?
Great question.
I don't even know how to answer that, because I don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow when I get up and
Right.
read the newspaper. But
Exactly.
it's an excellent point. Oh.
I think we're all holding on, to see what happens next in all of the pandemics of all forms that we're dealing with.
Yeah, you have your variation on that question is, how is the pandemic changing the church? And
Mhm.
if you want to sound really smart, you say it's an accelerant. It's speeding everything up. I've heard that word has been used a lot about, I don't know what that means, but I've used it. Mark, you wanted to say something?
Oh, no. Well, just to, again, thank you, bishops, and applaud you and your colleagues for moving in this direction and for the careful work that you've done with this. And certainly we all know, and this is, especially in a time like this, that there's always an experimental quality to anything new that we do like this, but that's exciting and fun. And, we've tried to follow the spirit in that, right?
Absolutely.
And I'm most excited, as obviously would be the case, by the fact that as our interns go through this process, that I can be there to support them, to cheer them on as they start having those conversations with the bishops and think about calls, and instead of having my heart sink that, what are they going to do after internship? Whose house are they going to be in? How are they going to make a living, and all that kind of stuff. So that's the thing I'm most excited about, is to kind of be in the sort of ground level of that beginning process to move forward into being a colleague, really, in ministry, which is always such a privilege and delight. And Krista Compton, Jim?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, she's one of our stellar intern pastors that we had, and well thought of in our history. So, and
Yes.
other things that give me pause, I think we've already talked about.
Okay, all right, good. Well, I think this is a great conversation. I really appreciate all of you were very forthright, honest. You had really legitimate questions. You raised new things we hadn't thought about, and that's the nature of this. So thank you for being a part of this. You will soon be featured on a YouTube channel near you. And what I would say is both to people that are watching this at a later date, is if you have questions, thoughts, feedbacks, contact your synod bishop. I mean, that's really, again, we're trying to funnel everything through that and say, hey, how does this work for me? Also, then those of you, Sam and Justin in particular, and Mark also, because you connect with candidates, if you hear conversation in the course of the next couple months or year, and there are questions, please send those to me. And I will get them then digested into the system, because you're going to hear things on the ground that you'll both be able to dispel. No, that's not what this is. But also you'll be able to say, hey, I hadn't thought about that. Wish I would ask that question, but I know who to ask it. And you all have my email now, so you can contact me. And then we've got a group of 9 bishops, 1 from each region, that put this together. And we're going to continue to be working on it going forward. So thanks for being a part of this.
Thank you all.
Thank you.